Hello, Professor. I was just telling our audience that we will do our interview today in English, and we have an AI live translation. So I was told to speak slowly so that AI can keep up with our pace. Thank you so much for being with us. Here in Milan today, we are discussing what Trump tariffs and trade tensions and shifting geopolitical alliances, as well as new technologies, mean for Europe and European businesses. And as you know, Italy is a manufacturing economy, and the US has been historically a very important trade partner for this country. So we're very much looking forward to hearing your thoughts. And my first question stems from an interview that the EU President Antonio Costa gave to the Financial Times today, where he says that Europe has turned the page on its previously rocky relationship with Trump. So I wonder now whether the real issue here is trade or whether it's defense, because obviously defense is a space in which Europe has made itself vulnerable. And is this page really going to be turned, or perhaps Trump hopes to continue threatening Europe to a certain extent until Europe will give in to his demands, for example, not only on defense spending, but for example, digital tax regulation or privacy law and whatnot. Although has been emphatic this won't happen, I wonder what your view is on who's going to give in first.
Great questions. Let me begin by saying I don't think any agreement with Trump is worth the paper that it's written on. He made an agreement with Canada and Mexico in his first term. And on the first day of the second term, he tore it up. Canada and Mexico thought they had accommodated him in this, long, complex negotiation. They had reached an agreement, but that was for the moment. So I think you have to look at an agreement with Trump as a temporary ceasefire, one which will be broken when that it's convenient for him to break it. The broader way of thinking about Donald Trump is he doesn't believe in the rule of law. He believes in the law of the jungle. And in the law of the jungle, it's the most powerful who wins. And he believes that the United States is the most powerful. But if you looked at the data, you would recognize that the US is less than 20% of GDP, much less global GDP, much less than 20% of global trade. Yes, the United States has an enormous defense spending, not all of it well done. It's as much spending as all the rest of the world put together. And defense is critical, as you mentioned. If I were, as an economist, looked at a pure trade negotiation between the United States and the EU, the answer, who would come out on top, would be EU. More people, larger market, more trade. EU would win. But that's not the agreement that was reached. It was disadvantaging Europe. It was, you might say, capitulation before a schoolyard bully. It made no economic sense at all. But in the context of the war with Ukraine, in Ukraine, where Russia has invaded Ukraine, and it is absolutely necessary for the world and for Europe to fight against this attack and to triumph in the end. and the U.S. Has the capacity to produce the arms that are needed. That's the way I think you need to look at the trade deal. It was not a trade deal, it was a trade and defense deal. And part of that, quote, deal was that Europe would pay to buy American arms to be shipped to Ukraine. And given the weaknesses in the European defense industry, I think there may have been little alternative.
So,
I think, well, let me just say one more thing about Costas's remark. So, that agreement was hardly agreed to just days later, and the U.S. was putting more demands on Europe, that it abandoned the Digital Market Act, the Digital Services Act, and if you don't do it, you will be threatened with more tariffs. So the question before Europe is one, is Europe sovereign? Does it want to protect its own sovereignty? And I think you have to draw red lines. Your EU commissioners, EU trade negotiator have said that they will not compromise on this issue. And if that is the case, you are once again into conflict with the United States.
right. So, as you said, Trump has been behaving quite erratically, and we have seen some extraordinary escalations, namely with Canada, but India too. And we've had a U.S. court rule that many of these tariffs are actually illegal. So the situation is quite complex, and it's hard to anticipate what will happen next. So I wonder, in your view, what this means for the global economic outlook, and more specifically, if you think that European businesses can give up the EU as a trade partner.
There is enormous uncertainty for the global economy, not just because of trade. The dollar is weak. The U.S. The chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors of the United States actually proposed that the U.S. default on the dollar. He didn't use those words. He said those who hold U.S. sovereign bonds might be induced to exchange those bonds for century bonds, yielding no interest, something nobody would voluntarily do. So he's called it default, forced exchange. So there is uncertainty in financial markets, uncertainty in trade markets, and trade, and uncertainty about the U.S. economy, which I think is not doing very well. I think businessmen in Europe and elsewhere have to learn how to deal without the United States. I think that's the reality. Now, of course, when you can get profits from dealing with the United States, do it. But the implication is one has to have what I would call a diversified strategy, making sure you're not relying on the United States. So take advantage of the opportunities in the United States when they're available, but recognize they may come and go, and they are not, should not be the foundations of long-term success.
I'm going to come back to the U.S. economy in a minute, but first, I'd like to ask you about Europe and China, because of course the U.S. is putting a lot of pressure on Europe to distance itself from China, but Europe doesn't really have the same degree of strategic hostility towards China, and actually if it will be forced to look at new partners, at new strategic trade partners, it actually might turn to Beijing, and those relations might actually strengthen. What's your view on this?
I agree with you. I think the first thing that one should observe is that Trump's policy has upended geopolitics and geoeconomics. There is a new order or disorder, and countries have to be looking for new partners. And people are asking themselves, what are their new partners? Canada always assumed that the US was a reliable partner. It now realizes it's not and is looking towards Europe as to be a closer partner. India was slapped with high tariffs, and you can see how upset they are. They're looking for new partners. The second observation I would make is that actually the hostility between the United States and China is bipartisan. It was there in the previous Biden administration. And that should tell you that no matter what happens to American politics, that hostility is likely to continue. And the observation that you made, I think, is very much to the point. This hostility to China is not rooted in a fundamental attempt by China to attack the United States or attack Europe. There is, you might say, a new Cold War going on. China is attempting to exert its influence in Africa and Latin America and other parts of the world. And I have to say, Trump is doing everything he can to reduce America's influence in these parts of the world by the hostile actions, erratic actions, taking away foreign aid from Africa, imposing a 50% tariff on Brazil simply because it wants to exercise the rule of law inside its country on somebody who has broken the law. So I think the answer to the question is that Europe should be looking towards China, recognizing that you don't share the same values in terms of democracy, but that doesn't mean that you can't engage in profitable trade, in the language win-win trade. One will have to be very thoughtful about areas of dependence, but clearly one should not accept the U.S. demands on for what your relationships with China should look like. Europe should make that decision for itself.
So, Professor, my final question to you is on Trump and his economic policies, which are often cited as examples by nationalist leaders here in Europe. So, America first, in essence. Figures aren't looking as good as Trump might have hoped. The latest job report 2 days ago shows that employment has stalled. There's a lot of pressure on the Federal Reserve. We've seen a dramatic crackdown on immigration. The latest is in the news, the raids on the Hyundai plant in Georgia. So I'm wondering, is Trump going to be as good as he thinks for the U.S. economy in the longer term?
I think it's going to be a disaster, and it's going to be really bad. And to your list, I would add the attack on science and on our universities. You know, the U.S. competitive advantage over the long term has been based on science, our universities, and I would say more broadly on the rule of law. Companies felt they could come to the United States because there was a stable and reliable legal system that they could count on, and America's scientific prowess was enormous. Trump has attacked that. I was not surprised with those numbers. The labor supply in the United States is down. Or let me put it more accurately, it's not grown as much as it would have before Trump, and for an obvious reason. Like Italy, but not to the same extent. Our citizens are not reproducing as much, and the expansion of our labor force has depended very much on immigration. And he has really made that very difficult as the both temporary immigration workers necessary for investments in the United States, as in the case of South Korean Hyundai plant, and just all of our industries are so dependent on immigrants. But the attack on immigrants and the way it's done, the violation of basic principles of humanity, you can feel the chill in New York, where Hispanics, even those who are citizens, feel afraid to come out of their homes and go shopping or go to work. And so there is both a demand side and a supply side negative effect of his policies that are leading to this really dismal labor report. And let me say, it's not only this month, it's the last 3 months that have been so much poorer than was the case in the months prior to Trump taking office.
Professor, thank you so much for your insight today. It's definitely not a very optimistic picture. The one you painted is, I guess, a realistic one, but not very optimistic. But it's going to be food for thought today here in Milan. So thank you so much.
Thank you.